Welcome to the Inspiring Veterans Podcast with your host, Gary Rohmann. In each episode of the Inspiring Veterans Podcast, Veterans Coach Gary Rohmann invites veterans and professionals who support veterans to discuss the process of transitioning out of armed service into civilian society. The Inspiring Veterans Podcast aims to answer the question, what's next? You can find the show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, GaryRohmann.com. Now here's the host of the Inspiring Veterans Podcast, your host, Gary Rohmann.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to my podcast. I'm Gary Rohmann, the Veterans Coach. And as the intro mentioned, my challenge or my objective in doing these podcasts is to answer the question, what's next? And today I'm very honored to be able to interview Stennett Rey, who I have known for a long period of time in a lot of different ways. First and foremost, Stennett went through my transition class when I was at Camp Pendleton. I think that was a little bit over a year ago, maybe longer than that, Stennett. But Stennett was in my class along with several other veterans, and we spent 3 days together but looking how to prepare for our futures as you transition out. So Stennett, welcome. Appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me, Gary. And I just want to say, congratulations to you on what you've been doing here for veterans, putting this podcast together to help, teach the next generation how to transition successfully. I think is very important. And I'm happy that you're out here doing it and bringing back some of the veterans so we could coach and mentor even on the other side.
Appreciate that very much, Stennett. We, in addition to the coaching or the transition workshop, we spent almost a year together doing monthly coaching activities. And quite frankly, as I look at your resume, it's phenomenal, Stennett. Why don't you, veterans have a strong sense of humility. And they don't like to talk about themselves. And I would imagine, I know Stennett's one of those, but Stennett has a rich background. So Stennett, don't be humble here. Tell us a little bit about some of the things you've achieved as a result of your military experience and while you were in the military.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Gary. And you're right. As veterans, we have a hard time talking about ourselves because you spend a lot of time in the military learning about team and being a part of that team. So really appreciate you acknowledging that. I spent 29 years in the Marine Corps. I joined in 1994, straight out of Jamaica, Queens, New York. When I enlisted, I ended up working on the aviation side of the house. So I was avionics technician for a period of time on unmanned aerial vehicles. And then I did a lateral move over into light attack helicopters as a sergeant. And then I spent a few years doing that. And then I went out on recruiting, as all good career-minded enlisted Marines should do. I went out on recruiting, had a phenomenal time out there, learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about how to engage folks in conversations and really kind of sell a product, and which was the Marine Corps. And it was easy to do because I enjoyed my time as a Marine in the Fleet Marine Forces. So I did 3 years out there. I returned back to my squadron, did a couple deployments, Iraq, Afghanistan. Then I transitioned over to be a first sergeant. I was sent over to an infantry unit where I spent some time there, deployed to Afghanistan on an embedded training team for a period of time. Came back to the States and spent quite a few years in the logistics element with combat engineers, maintenance battalion, and some other units. So I really got a chance to see the diversity of, our MAGTAF is what we call it in the Marine Corps, and how all those pieces fit together. I was selected to Sergeant Major, and I spent some time with 5th Anglico out in Okinawa. So spent 3 years out there and came back stateside. And then eventually ended up being slated to work as the Sergeant Major for 1st Marine Logistics Group. Was at the general officer level, and I did that for 3 years before I retired. So I can't say enough about military service. You ask, how did it help me? Even now in transition, I think that when I look back on the tough times in the Marine Corps, it definitely helps you to focus in on building that resilience to meet challenges head on and find a way to work through them. And I find that in transition, that is exactly the attitude that you need, because you're going to be challenged. Every single one of us. It doesn't matter if you spend 4 years, 20 years, or 30 years wearing the uniform. Every transition has its challenges, and you have to be able to meet those head on, because a lot of times on the other side of this transition, there are responsibilities, whether those are to family, whether those are financial obligations, you have to be able to provide. So the Marine Corps gave me all the tools that I needed to be successful on this side.
So let me kind of dig back into that a little bit. In the first place, can I ask you, why did you decide to enlist in the Marine Corps?
Hey, great question. I'm from New York, so military service is it's not the first thing that you think about. But I did have a couple of buddies who were joining the military, so I spoke to all the recruiters, and the most persistent recruiter was the Marine recruiter. Those men and women, they are definitely persistent, and the message that at the time was a great message. I mean, I remember sitting in the office and watching the recon VHS tape that they popped in and going, man, I would really love to do something like that. But at the end of all of it, I think that any service that you decide to join is going to give you a sense of belonging and camaraderie and set you up for success. For me, I think the Marine Corps was the perfect choice because the values and the tenacity that you have to get through some of the training and some of the deployments, it absolutely sets you up for success in so many other areas of life.
Well, we've talked about many of those things. So, and as I worked with you during your initial transition before you officially retired, I hate to use that word because you really are not retired. You got the engine still full throttle. But what would you say has been your biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge, I think, even preparing for retirement or transition is figuring out who you are. And I think that the time we spent together, it was well spent, because after like I said, 4, 20 or 29 years, 30 years, you are a part of the organization more than you think, right? And who are you when you take the uniform off? Who are you? What do you want to do? Where do you want to live? There are a ton of questions that have to be asked. And I think that the challenge, for me personally, was figuring out, what I wanted to do with all of the skills and education that I'd acquired over the years. What did I want to do in the next chapter? And it can be daunting just to think about, because the Marine Corps was my entire adult working life, right? 29 years is a long time. You don't know much outside of the Marine Corps, even though you know a lot. But there's a difference. There's a difference between the things you do in service and then the things you do when you take the uniform off. And being able to adapt to that new environment is critical for success. So for me, it was recognizing that some of my successes in military, in uniform, may not translate over to success in my next chapter, right?
Yeah.
and defining that and understanding, which tools do I take with me and continue to water and nurture, and then which things do I kind of look at and say, okay, that's something that I leave behind because that's not applicable in my new on my new journey. So, for me, that was a challenge, trying to figure that out.
I know we had a number of long conversations about what you were going to, well, what's next, right? Um, and, I think the adjustment to a different culture is probably the biggest one. Quite honestly, I was kind of surprised, and when you told me you were going to start your own business. And, we talked about a lot of things, but, you ended up starting your own business. Tell me a little bit about how you came to that decision and how, and a little bit more about what you're doing today.
Yes. And, during the transition, we did have quite a few conversations about some, areas that I could move into that would take advantage of some of my experiences. And, as I went through the job search really last year, the market's going to dictate, where you're going to be. We can have a ton of experience, a ton of education, but the market will decide whether you're going to be transitioning into the role that you really wanted. Um, for me, I was thinking about going into consulting. Uh, the last year, as you and I talked about a little bit, the world changed, the world of business changed with the advancement in artificial intelligence and some of these areas, and it caused the market to shift a little bit as far as job seekers, because companies were trying to decide how they were going to incorporate these new technologies, and they were freezing headcount increases. And so, in taking a look at everything that was going on, understanding that I was now not only competing with, other job seekers, but I was actually competing against individuals with recent and relevant experience in consulting, because some of these consulting firms were laying some of their people off. And so I quickly pivoted from looking for a position in consulting to taking a look at businesses that I could be involved in. And so, as I was searching for businesses, initially it was look for a business, passive income, absentee owner. But as I started reading profit and loss statements and asking questions of some of these business owners, I realized that there are a ton of folks running businesses. Why aren't I? And so I quickly pivoted to, okay, I've got a business degree. I understand a bit about employment law. Let's see if we could put all those things together and find an opportunity for me. And I did. And I found this staffing agency franchise that was up for sale, PrideStaff San Diego. I met with the corporate team, really enjoyed what their values were for the company, aligned directly with my values and kind of the values of the Marine Corps. And it was just a match. And it's the people business, right? The opportunity to help folks find gainful employment, and also link those, these clients up with people who want to work, good people who are searching for opportunities to provide for themselves and their family.
Well, you mentioned something that I noted. Actually, we discussed about this many times, but I always used to say to my class, preparation equals separation. And you took full advantage of preparing for your future. Not only what the military provided you as far as leadership training and all that, but you completed 4 degrees while you were in the military. And it really, I admired that, because military is, it's more than a full-time job, and the responsibilities are enormous. I just, admire you for being able to do that over a period of 29 years. That's amazing. So again, I think that really, the investment you made early or while you were in the military, what I would imagine had a big impact on your final decision.
Yes, it did, Gary. And completing a degree while you're on active duty, I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. Lots of time invested in, early mornings or weekends, however you do it. For me, it was early mornings because I have a family and didn't want to, I wanted to be able to balance some of that time. And when I say balance, it wasn't 50-50, right? But I was around, for the family, and I would wake up early in the morning and study because I knew that it was the one thing that could separate me from the competition. All those folks who I may be competing with for an opportunity to work with the company. And education obviously is not the be all end all, but it helps, right? It helps your brand. It helps. It shows employers that you're serious about yourself. You're serious about your craft. You are invested in education long term, and you want to be able to bring all of those skills into a company, right? All your knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so that was, one of the reasons why I really committed at a certain point to gaining, the education necessary to be competitive and set myself up for success at the end. To your point, I think sometimes we as service members wait until the end and try to cram in a ton of classes, and sometimes that could be very stressful. And I always told young Marines and sailors, um, take one class a semester, right? One class a semester. That's all you have to do. And if you do that, you are preparing yourself mentally, right, for your transition at some point. Because we all have to transition. There's no lifetime appointment for us enlisted Marines and sailors and service members. We all have to go at some point. So, what are you doing to make sure that you're successful in that next step?
Exactly. Well, the military does a tremendous job of creating a culture of success, and it's a must because I mean you're in the front lines. Hopefully, that will never get the call where you've got to really defend America in a very challenging way. Of course, you were in Afghanistan, Iraq, you're protecting America. But if the military doesn't do a good job creating a culture of success, then the military can't do its job effectively as it has historically. So now that you're out of the military, what kind of culture are you experiencing? You mentioned the company PrideStaff.
Mhm.
They're probably part of the culture, but you also, as you work kind of independently, have to create your own culture, don't you?
Hmm. Absolutely. Um, and that's the great thing about entrepreneurship, right? You can define what that culture is going to be, how folks will be treated. As a sergeant major, I spent many years reading commanders' intent. As every new commander assumes their position, they set out letters about how they feel on certain topics and how the organization will be ran for the next 2 years. And I did the same thing. I took a page right out of that book. I've read many of them. I've sat with commanding officers and commanding generals, and given my advice on what to add to some of those letters. And I sat down and wrote my own operating kind of philosophy here for PrideStaff San Diego. And a lot of it had to do with how we will treat people, how we will conduct ourselves ethically with our interactions between, our clients and also our job seekers, and just overall giving direction to my team here in the office about how we are going to conduct ourselves. And although some folks may think that business is sometimes unethical, I do believe that there's a space for many of us, the business owners, who will behave ethically in all instances. instead of letting profits drive our actions all the time. So I absolutely believe that, number one, I was raised the right way with my family to do the right thing when it needs to be done, reinforced 29 years in the Marine Corps. And now I'm trying to uphold the same type of standard here, at least for my small piece of the pie, right? Uh, as much as we can do to be professional and courteous to individuals while conducting business.
Now, just Pride staff. I mean, tell me a little bit more about what you do in Pride staff. Okay, I
Mhm.
think that would be helpful to our audience.
Absolutely. PrideStaff is a staffing agency. Nationwide, we have approximately 81, 82 offices. We just had three new strategic partners get approved over the last month. So, great time for the organization. As a staffing agency, I have a territory here in San Diego that goes from just south of Del Mar down to the border, and then east to the unincorporated. So fairly large territory. What do? We service small and medium-sized businesses who are looking for staffing solutions. Some of our services that we provide are temporary assignments, temp to hire, if you think contract, 3 to 6 months, and then direct hire. Direct hire meaning that there's a company that may not have a full HR team, but they have a very unique position that they need to fill. They may call us and say, "Can you find us an electrical engineer?" And because those, with a certain skill set, and because we have the recruiters who can dedicate 100% of the time, and it really helps companies save their time, focus more on their business. And then the candidates that they receive from us have been vetted, at least 95% of the job description, and that they're really talking to those individuals who are most qualified for the position. So it saves a lot of time. So, in a nutshell, small to medium sized businesses are where we focus on. Three services that we provide, and the only people who pay in this equation are the clients. Our job seekers and associates never pay us a dime for finding or getting them linked up with gainful employment.
Well, I mean, obviously, you're in the Marine Corps, and you worked in HR for a period of time, correct?
Yes.
And I'm sure that experience has helped been very beneficial as you have worked with this new organization, expanding it, getting it off the ground, and so forth.
It has. The people are people, right? Of course, there's a in the service you have a particular set of rules that you follow, right? And there's a training requirement, and all of these things that have to occur for you to get to a certain point or a certain rank when you're wearing the uniform. Uh, but what I found is, the relationship building, treating people with respect, listening to individuals has been critical to success for us here in this office. We can never forget the people aspect, right? Because the people are the engine that drives productivity, they drive revenue, drive success. And if you, as an organization, focus in on the people and taking care of them and providing them with a great environment, they will be more productive, and they will appreciate the efforts of any good employer. So I do think that a lot of the things that I learned as a Marine with people and relationships have paid big dividends for me here.
Tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think in the military, you have to prove yourself almost every day. Is that accurate?
You do every day. Every day you're proving yourself. Every day you're competing against someone, or you're competing against yourself, right? Gary, I think we talked about this before. Is sometimes you're competing against yourself. Every day you wake up, and how do you look at yourself and say, how do I get a little bit better today?
Yeah. The reason I asked you that question, I was listening to, I'm actually reading a book, and one of the statements, it was a colonel who had transitioned out and talked about his experiences, and he gave some advice at the end. And one of the things he said, you can't forget that you're going to have to prove yourself in a civilian culture or in a corporate environment. And as I look back at my corporate experience, you know, it is so true. I mean, if you want to advance your career, you've got to prove yourself each and every day. Now, that's a heavy responsibility. And sometimes some of us, like myself, unfortunately, take it to an extreme. But at the same time, there's a lot of merit in what you experience with the military culture of proving yourself. So now you've had to prove yourself to a new umbrella corporation that you've had to prove it to your new staff, prove yourself to them, and then you have to prove it to your new customers, which you're bringing on. They have to trust you that you're going to provide them the best employees, right? So you're continuously doing that to this day, proving yourself.
Yeah, every day, Gary. My advice to any service member is heed the words of that colonel, because there's a lot. You gain a lot of education and experience when you're in uniform. Then your challenge or your goal, I wouldn't say your challenge, your goal should be to take all of that, articulate it in such a way that can get your foot in the door and then prove yourself through your actions. Because you and I both know people say a lot of things, right? It's what you do that matters the most.
That's
Do
right.
you show up every day? Do you put your best foot forward? Whatever your 100% is, do you try to achieve that every day? Those are the things that matter when you go into a corporation. One of the things that I had to get used to was, and I think we talked about it during our time together in our mentoring sessions, where sometimes you have to take a look at things and understand that our currency in the military is readiness, right? And you're always being graded on your readiness. But when you cross over this side, when you are with a for-profit business, the currency is the currency. How much revenue are you generating, right? And that number is used to drive business decisions. And as service members, we're not exposed to that enough, so we don't all really understand that dynamic. And so I would tell folks to really understand what the company you would like to work for, understand what drives them every day, and can you contribute to that bottom line. And that's really what it boils down to. Be the best version of yourself and bring your skills to bear every day. And I promise you that your actions will be noticed, and you'll be put in positions of increased responsibility.
Well, you've hit on a number of key things there, and we unfortunately have enough time to kind of dig down into each of them, because in essence, you're translating your military experience into an experience that companies want to hire. And so you've got to translate your language. And you just hit on, versus readiness versus profits, right? Readiness versus profits. Another one is customer service. Companies want people to know how to serve other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the military culture. People that basically can communicate effectively, So you got to translate from your military experience terminology into what companies like to hear or really want to have in their organization. So and profits is at the top of the list.
That's right. Yeah, I would say for service members as they transition, understanding that dynamic, but also being adaptable. Because the great thing about the staffing industry is I get to see the entire landscape. And what we are finding more and more is that the siloed role is going away, and someone who's adaptable to do one or two other things is really being prioritized. For example, you may have a job that used to be a call center, and they just want you to be a customer service representative. Well, now that type of role also wants you to have the ability to do some inside sales, because you and I both know that inside sales generates an outside sales appointment and hopefully a contract and long-term revenue generation, right? And so now companies are looking for individuals who are adaptable, that you can do more than one thing. And that's the military in a nutshell, right? We were all taught from the time we were E1s, recruits in recruit training, that not only are you going to do this job, but you're going to learn to do 4 other jobs. And that adaptability is key. And being able to articulate that adaptability by setting it up in that STAR method when you are interviewing with someone, by listing an example of how your adaptability helped your team, help your unit achieve an objective or whatever it is going to be very important during the interview process. So you hit on some great things there, Gary, but I definitely think we had adaptability as a service member to your toolkit, and something that transitioning service members really highlight is very important.
Well, Stennett, I could talk with you all day, and it's been a while since we've had an opportunity to chat, and it's so good to be able to catch up with you. You've given us some really good things to think about, process. Is there any last suggestion you might make for those that are getting out? What would be at your top of the list?
The top of the list is number one, find someone like Gary to talk to during your transition. The time we spent together was invaluable. I did have a lot of resources, but I really looked forward to our monthly conversations, because the more you talk about something, the easier it is for you to kind of realize your plan, right? And having conversations about it is very important. You don't have to do it alone. Please don't do it alone. Plenty of resources. For service members who spent, I would say, 10 plus years, I always try to break it up into 4 quadrants now. Quadrant 1 is, your medical and your health, right? Make sure you take care of that. The second quadrant is finances. And so take a good hard look at your finances. If you need to research and hire a financial planner, go ahead and do it. They can give you the ins and outs of your rollover of your TSP. How would you approach a 401k in a new job? And then, those tax liabilities, because things change as you transition out of the military. The job search is in that quadrant as well. So helping, making sure you have a really good resume, at least started 2 to 3 years out, and then continue to work on it and refine it and learn how to fine tune that resume is going to be great. And networking, of course, to make sure that, your efforts are being told. You're telling your story at these networking events. Those are the things that I would say on the 4 quadrants. And then, some other things that I always tell folks is, you have to ask yourself a couple questions, right? Where do you want to live? Do you have to love the work that you're going to do? What hours do you want to work? What's a reasonable hour for you? Is it a first shift, a second shift, an overnight shift? What works best for your family? And then if you want to make good money, and if you had to take all 5 of those questions and only have 3, what would they be? And talk to your significant other about that, because they are part of the transition as well.
Yeah.
So, and read.
Well, Senator, this has been outstanding, and I think you've given us so much. And the stats do indicate that 75% of veterans have indicated that the transition in and of itself was harder than they expected. And so you've given us some things. And I would conclude the most important thing is start your transition early. Start preparing early, and don't wait until the last 6 months. I would say probably 3 years in advance, maybe 2. But there are so many things that are involved in here, and you've given us tremendous insight and, quite frankly, solutions to have a successful transition. I can't thank you enough, Stennett. And I know that the days ahead for you are going to be very successful.
Thank you, Gary. And again, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. All the best.
You've been tuning into the Inspiring Veterans Podcast with your host, Gary Rohmann. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, GaryRohmann.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.